It's a privilege to be here, and I would like to thank you personally very much for giving me the opportunity to come here to partake in your event, which I think comes at a perfect time, and it covers a topic that is absolutely troubling to many, many peoples in the world. Lou and I have been good friends for over a decade now. We have disagreed on issues, but we have also agreed on issues. We have tried to understand each other's points of view. And I think rather than making a quick agreement or disagreement, we should always try to ask the questions, why are people thinking the way they are? Now, I have a somewhat awkward job to do here. I'm supposed to speak on the future of U.S.-U.N. relationships. So I was asking myself, who am I? Am I the President of the United States to decide what that future of the U.S.-U.N. relationship will be? Am I the majority leader in the Senate or in the House? Who am I? I'm not an American citizen. I'm a German citizen. I'm a friend. I've been a friend of the U.S. for almost 50 years. Occasionally, I'm a lover of the United States. But as this is with love, it sometimes causes disappointments too. We all know that. And one of my latest disappointments has been that my country should get chided for the fact that it didn't want to go to war. We were praised for our Constitution 50 years ago, the new Constitution of Germany. We were praised for the fact that in our Constitution was written that no government leader should ever make any preparations in a war of aggression. Now, we know times change, but we were applauded for these things. And we acted against this Constitution once. That was in the case of the Kosovo campaign. As you recall, Kosovo was not mandated by the war was not mandated by the United Nations. It was mandated. We substituted the United Nations mandate by the mandate of all democratic countries. And why did the Germans go along with this, call it a breach of their constitution, or the substitute of legitimacy? Simply because we saw on the television screens the murderous things going on in Kosovo. We saw genocide. We saw ethnic cleansing. It was in our living rooms every day. And yes, we had sworn after World War II never again war should start from German soil. But we had also sworn never again genocide should come, and should we allow genocide to happen. So that was another thing. In the case of Iraq, my government, and Lou knows that, we can talk in discussions, in individual discussions. I don't agree with a lot of things that Herr Schröder has said and done, particularly during the election campaign, distancing him from the United Nations. I think this was wrong. But his decision not to go to Iraq was based on constitutional beliefs, on the fact that he did not see the linkage between Al-Qaeda and Saddam Hussein, on the fact that most of the Germans, in fact most of the Europeans, were skeptic about this weapons of mass destruction, and we had hoped that a regime of inspections could have helped to solve that issue without bloodshed. Now, as we now know, the United Nations inspections regimes must have been better than anticipated at that time by large majorities in this country. Because everyone expected, we would run into large amounts of weapons of mass destruction. So obviously, to say something good about the UN, which has not been said, a lot of it has been said, and I commend this previous panel for doing what they did and speaking out what they did. What we must say, what we must admit is today that the United Nations inspections regime cannot have been too bad. I mean, it must have been rather successful. Now, since I cannot foretell the future of American UN relations, I can still try to ask some questions to Americans. And you people, your government, your society will have to give an answer to these questions, and then these answers will determine the future of relationship of your country and the United Nations. Question number one, and I think perhaps one of the more fundamental one, is: can America agree? Can America share the view that globalization means interdependence? We all depend on each other. And that there is, with globalization, the way we interpret it and the way we want it, there is the necessity for a common responsibility for the welfare of the world, to put it that very simply. About a year ago, I did a series of lectures in a small college in Pennsylvania, and they had a wall, on the wall they had a map of the United States, and I was new to them and they were new to me, and I asked one of them if he could outline to me the borders of the United States. They kind of looked at me and God, what a queer he is. I mean, can't he see where the borders of the United States is? I said, well, yes, I knew that Pacific Ocean, Atlantic Ocean, Canada, Mexico, and I knew all that. I was still looking for the borders of the United States. And they didn't, for a moment they didn't get it. Then I asked them if they would please show me the borders of the U.S. on the internet. Where is the border of the United States on the internet, on the email between this place here and my home place in Berlin? It's hard to tell, isn't it? Where is the border of the United States when you have 12 million Americans living abroad? Where is the border of the United States when you have made billions and billions and billions of capital investments in all parts of the globe, most of them in Europe, by the way, by far the most in Europe? So many investments that 12 million European jobs depend on American investment, and 12 million American jobs depend on European investment in America. So where are the borders of our countries? I can't find them that easily, at least. This is why the idea that the nation state, the state that is defined by borders, becomes fragile, becomes difficult to deal with. And this is why we need to find new ways of dealing with another. There are other serious reasons for that too: asymmetrical warfare, terrorism, and all these things. These do not originate from states anymore. They originate from chaos, you might say. But this is the question: can America accept that going global and preaching globalism to the world means that you have to accept interdependence? The congressmen this morning, they were talking about the spread of democracy, the ideas of democracy to make the world a safer place. Would it not, my question, would it not be a very noble cause, and would it work? It's just an idea, I don't know if it will work, to, within the United Nations, form a body of the democracies. There are many regional groups, in the African group, the Middle East group, and there are other groups. And the fact that Libya had the seat in this what do you call it, Human Rights Commission, is due to the fact that Libya was nominated by the African groups. If we claim that so many countries in the UN are not democratically constituted states, although we have learned this morning that the body itself is very democratic. The United Nations body itself is set up very democratic. Now, shouldn't we form a coalition, or at least a caucus? Within every parliament, there's a caucus of different groups. Now, what about a caucus of the democracies within the United Nations, making itself heard, and perhaps on one or the other occasions, if the United Nations cannot agree on fundamental principles, I mean on really fundamental principles, that we would take this as a substitute legitimacy, as we did in the case of Kosovo. During his last televised speech in the General Assembly, Kofi Annan used he was speaking of the danger of the strategy of preemptive strikes. And he used another formula. I think we should listen very closely to this. He called it, I quote, the early authorization of collective measures against terrorism and WMDs. The early authorization, what does he mean with that? He sees that under the present circumstances, it could be an authorization by the UN Security Council could be too late, too late to stop a terrorist from flying into the World Trade Center. So whenever we feel that there is danger looming at the horizon, can we devise and think of an early authorization scheme? I think, and I wonder if America would be willing to work with or for such a scheme within the United Nations, rather than say, we will do preemptive strikes, and this will be up for us to decide, because then the Europeans fear, what if anybody else would use the same right for preemptive strikes? I don't want to, I don't want to attract anyone to that, but there are trouble spots in the world. There's a lot of conflict between Pakistan and India. Both of them are nuclear powers. What would a preemptive strike mean in that region? I'm not saying that anything of this sort will happen, might happen, and of course it should not happen. But what would it mean? What would the strategy of preemptive strike mean? Or is this only one country that has the right to preemptive strikes? This is what Europeans are questioning. That's why I think we should listen to Kofi Annan. Think of an early authorization system. My question to Americans is, are they willing to discuss that with the United Nations and with their allies? Next question is about power. What is power? I have the feeling, and many Europeans with me have the feeling right now, that America thinks in terms of, when it thinks of power, it thinks in terms of military power. There are other types of power. There's economic power. Economically, the European Union is not much behind the United States. And as of January the 1st, we'll be ahead of you guys, because we will then have 425 million people, and we have a bigger national product, combined national product than the United States will have. By the way, the funding of the United Nations was supposed to be according to the wealth, to the income of the nations, and distributed according to that. And the 22% that the United States is paying for the United Nations is not nearly adequate to that. The 8 leading European economic powers combined, with a much smaller combined gross national income, pay 35% of the dues. Only 8 of the 15 now members of the EU, and of course then later on we will, as of January the 1st, we will be 25. So I don't think the world and the United Nations is overburdening the American taxpayer. I think 22%, it was lowered from 25 to 22%, and we always must have in mind the UN will only be so strong as it can be with the resources it has got. And I'm grateful for your remark that 48% of the expenditures of the UN goes to the benefit of the American economy. So I'll keep that in mind sometimes for some other discussions. Thank you. So what kind of power are we speaking of? And can we expect America to appreciate what we call soft power, which is not necessarily economics and money? That can be a pretty hard business too. But Europeans have been through such a lousy history in the last 350 years, or the last 300 years, before the last 50 years, that we have developed other mechanisms than just power mechanisms. And I think we have done well, and the Germans in post-war Germany have done well in using soft power, because we restrained ourselves, and you expected us to restrain ourselves from using hard power. So we have learned our lesson and have tried to use soft power. And if you think soft power cannot achieve anything, then just look at the European Union. Look at what is going on in Europe. And I can only call upon particularly young Americans. Look what is going on in Europe, a historic process that has never happened in 1,000 years. My country benefits most from this. For the first time, I guess since 1,000 years or so. We do not want to make war on any one of our neighbors. We have 9 neighbor states. And none of our neighbor states wants to go to war with us. This is an absolutely radically different situation for Germany for 1,000 years. So soft power, we hold it in high esteem because we have lived with it and it has been successful. Another question is, we were talking about the efficiencies and the inefficiencies of the Security Council. Well, if the Security Council does not reflect the world of today anymore, will America help to change it? Will America help to change the role and the composition and what have you of the Security Council? Can we allow the Security Council, which is, by the Charter, responsible for peace in the world, can we allow this to be composed without India having a major seat in it, or Japan, or none of the Latin American countries? Germany, you see, we would accept more responsibility, but we could also think it would be very difficult with the other 2 Europeans. We have 2 European seats in the Council. We could share 1 seat with them. It would have to be up. It would be very difficult amongst ourselves to do that. But forget the German, on the European side of it, it may be an important thing, but there is, I think Latin America, Africa, Asia are underrepresented in the Security Council. It always would depend on how that council would look, how much of the seats would be veto seats, etc., etc., etc. This would have to be. But the question is, will America join in and get this process thinking again? You are the leading nation, the leading country in the world. You are the leader of the Western democracies. We need some leadership on that too. So, will we get it? That will determine the future of U.S.-UN American relation. I'm going to play a trick on you. Do Americans realize that they have taken the role of the Brits of 150 years ago? At that time, Britain was the most disliked nation on earth. Today, it's the Americans. The reason, many of the reasons, everybody have their special reasons about this. I think one of the major reasons is because you bump into them so often. Very simply. At that time, 150, 160, 170 years ago, Britain was everywhere. Everywhere you went in the world was Britain. And a lot of other cultures and nations, and they felt sort of bullied and pushed around and needing more culturally, politically, economically, militarily. Today it's America. Wherever you go, you run into them. Now, I'm not saying that you should stay home. This is not my suggestion. But I will now read a short quote to you. And I'll then let you guess who is the author of that. Quote, "The U.S. should place its operation in a post-Saddam Iraq under a United Nations umbrella as soon as possible. A conspicuous American occupation force in Iraq or in any Arab or Muslim country would only fuel anti-Americanism, nationalism, and resentment. By working through the UN, America will neutralize the accusations that a war in Iraq is anti-Muslim or driven by oil or American imperialism." Lou, who said that?
Bush one?
No. Your friend and my friend, the senator from the state of Nebraska, Republican Senator Chuck Hagel.
Well, that doesn't surprise me.
I thought it was quite cute. He said that on February 20th
Yeah,
in a speech at a university. It's a noble place to be. And he said that. And I've talked to him since. And I think he is convinced. So it's not only the view of a German social democrat, but I think there's a feeling in this country too that joining hands with the UN will not be detrimental to your cause, but it will help. Next question. If I'm not overdoing, anyone block me if I'm doing.
No.
Okay. Next question. Will America help to create a level playing field in all political, social, and economic matters? The congressman this morning, they said, well, they would prefer bilateral trade agreements. My country has been an extremely powerful and player in international trade. And we have always said, we have always known, look, when we do a trade agreement with some of the lesser countries in Africa or in Asia, we will always win. It's a win-win situation. And that's why it's not a level playing field. And the consequence of Cancun, of the failed conference in Cancun, the WTO conference in Cancun, must not be that we return to bilateralism, because it is then the Americans, the Germans, the French, the British, the Japanese, the Koreans who will really make the money. And the rest of the world will get poorer, because they will always lose. So that's why I think we need a regime in trade and in investments that will sort of give us a level playing field for the smaller and lesser and sometimes desperately poor countries, at least to have an option, have a chance to go ahead. A lot of it has been said a while ago. We need to imply women's rights. I think this is a very important issue. And we have from our own development aid that we have given to African countries, we have learned that the better developed women's rights are, the more democracy you have in countries. So that's why I kind of would like to ask the question, would America accept the United Nations, which, as we have heard, as a body in itself is a democratic institution, but it deals with people who are not democracies. Now, would the United States accept the UN as a teacher in democracy? I think many of these learned professors and the experienced United Nations buffs could give you examples where through a slow, very slow process, very patient process, democracy has been won, at least has been on the move forward. We heard about the election regime, that election observers and all this, that it does for a country that is torn by tribal strifes, by ethnic strifes, by what have you, by corruption, by whatever. So if we would accept, all of us, the United Nations, not as something that we pay a certain amount into and, you get a return right away. It's not that kind of a slot machine, but that we consider it as an investment in our future common security. Because none of us, none of the rich countries can have an interest in an impoverished Africa. And it wasn't said this morning yet, it was said somewhere else, that all data concerning Africa are on the downward slide, with one exception. That's literacy. Literacy is growing in Africa, and that gives a little bit of hope. But all other indicators, economic, social, whatever, are on the downward slide. And how are we going to live with that? How are we going to live with that when we have all our great ideals, the ideals of justice, the ideals of freedom, the ideals of liberty? In May, I was in Indianapolis and I gave a speech at the occasion of the Holocaust Memorial Day that the state was holding there. And I quoted from a very dear document. We behold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal. Not all American men or all women, all German men or all European men or so, that all men are created equal. Do we believe that? Do we really believe it? If it's just for the Sunday speech, I think it's not so good. We should ask ourselves, each and every one of us should ask ourselves, do we believe it? And if we believe it, do we hope, not that we can make this come about just at a click of the finger, but by constant, by slow, by tedious work, by setbacks and by progress again, we can one day reach at least a situation where we can say this generation of post-World War II politicians, this generation has made a few steps ahead, and the next generation sitting in this audience will have to take the next steps ahead. Far away, a shining light in the distance, that is. But without a guiding light, what is life? So, I cannot answer your question of your symposium, Lou. I have hopefully added a little to to your thoughts. The answers you will have to give to yourselves. Tomorrow I will speak a little more about the German perspective on how things are, and maybe that all adds up to a little bit of sense. Thank you for your kind.
Are there any questions? Bob, you have anything at all? Yeah, Professor? Or here we got, why don't we?
This is an indirect question. When America sidestepped the U.N. with regards to the Iraq War, it's brought Germany and France closer. What do you see in the long term, the relationship between Germany and France?
Between Germany, I would like Americans
due to the Iraq War.
I would like Americans to understand. I was mentioning the European Union and the historic situation that the efforts for the European Union have created in Europe. And this is largely due, not alone, but the driving force behind the European Union have been Germany and France. Germany is our largest trade partner. It is our closest friend. The peoples. Germany and France fought 3 wars in 75 years. These were simply civil wars. Because we know, philosophers say so, learned people, professors say so, that in each European there's 25% of national identity and 75% of a European identity. My hometown of Cologne boasts of the wonderful Cologne Cathedral. The Gothic style was founded and designed first in northern France. These were our brothers. And so this relationship with France is very close, but Germany will not go, if that's what you mean, Germany will not go Gaullist. And the French people will not go Gaullist. There are some parts of Mr. Chirac's party, and perhaps Mr. Chirac himself, who still thinks in terms of Gaullism, of a European counterweight to the United Nations. There is no such thing in the general European public. I think the Germans would simply reject to define a European community against the United States. We define it as a strong part of the transatlantic community, which in fact is based on the same values, the same creeds. I quoted one sentence from the Declaration of Independence, and of course that holds true to Germany as well as it holds true to France, where some of these thoughts that Jefferson wrote down were invented, Montesquieu and what have you, and Locke and other people. So we are forming a communion of values. We may disagree, but this is part of our culture. This is part of democracy, that we may be allowed to say no, because there are certain things in our national constitutions that prohibit us from doing this. But it does not. And if we find allies, it was held against France, it was held against Germany that they sought the support of other countries in the Security Council, while the Americans sought support for it. I remember Mr. Powell talking very intensively to the delegates of Chile and others that were on the Security Council at that time. So this is the thing that happened. Security Council is a wheeling and dealing instrument before it ever reaches a resolution. No, I think we will want to have good, friendly, cordial relations with France. We feel that we have a historic obligation, and by the way, France has done an enormous amount of goodwill towards bringing Poland and other Eastern nations into the European Union. So, when I leave tomorrow, I will have one last wish. I would say I wish the Americans would, at some time or other, sort of make an advance towards France and look more for the communities with France than for the differences with France.
Maybe a good symposium.
Maybe a good symposium would be a wonderful thing.
We need guards, but we can try.
Yeah, I know it's going to be difficult to do, but we know the French. They act up. They always act up, and they're not happy when they cannot act up. But just take it. Like, you have other vices and virtues. We have other vices and virtues, but they just from time to time they need to act up. Take it for what it is. Take it the way the French do it. I live in a little community. Occasionally, I live in a little community in France, far away from Paris, and my neighbors are all my age group, and they say, you know what? Oh, Chirac, well, yes, grander nation, etc. No. Without you, we are nothing. And the German attitude is, we would like to be closely associated with the French, but we would not want to have to make a choice between France or America. That is what we don't want. We are not defining ourselves against America as a counterweight, or call it whatever you want. We are part of the common transatlantic community.
One more question. Is there another one back there? Okay, 2 more questions.
I enjoy your presentation very much. Just like to highlight a couple of very important points you mentioned. When we talk about democracy, democracy doesn't mean that everybody's going to always agree with the same points, and that's one of the things happening right now in the UN. I think too much has been made out of this differences between the United States and France. In any democracy, those type of things happen. This has happened at the international matter. We, as Americans, we owe French a great deal. If it wasn't for the help of the French at the start of our republic, we would be probably a British colony for another 100 years or so.
They sold you half the country.
Exactly. Plus, yeah. Well, everybody has been selling us, including the Russians and a number of other ones, but that's another issue. Something else which you mentioned, which is very, very important, is if we as Americans can actually, obviously advocate globalism, and if we are a pretty good listener of our own message and we are willing to accept the notion that globalization comes, we like it or not, with interdependence, and that's a very important point. Another very important point you mentioned is about the notion of unilateralism. You know, you implied that more than you're mentioning it directly, unilateralism as opposed to multilateralism. And I believe that this is going to be actually one of the topics of one of the other panels during this symposium, yes, which is a very, very important issue, I think. There were some like half-truth mentioned by some of the members of Congress who just left. And one of it was, for example, since when they see it since the Roman Empire, this is the first time there is a single superpower. First of all, the notion of U.S. being the single superpower right now, this is not 100% accurate, because it really depends on what issues we are talking about. If you're talking about political and diplomatic issues, yes. If you're talking about military issues, there are still 2 major powers in the world, U.S. and Russia, which are able to destroy the world 6 times or 7 times over with their capability. Which is enough. And yes, which I think when you destroy it once is plenty. And the third aspect is, if you look at the economic dimension of it, there is actually a triangular competition between the U.S. as a part of NAFTA, European Union from the other side, and last but not least, Japan and its sphere of influence. And one of the members of Congress thought that since the Roman period is the first time that there is a single superpower. Actually, his explanation was not even correct, because even during the Roman Empire, first there were the Greeks, and then when the Romans swallowed the Greeks, and in Europe they were the only superpower, there were still the Persians, in the Middle East, and then beyond the Persians there were the Indians and there were Chinese. So it represents, unfortunately, one of the problems we have in our Congress, which is we are looking at things only from one perspective. Do you have any any other comments about that, the notion of unilateral as opposed to multilateralism?
Yeah, I would have that, but I think I have somewhat in my manuscript for tomorrow, where I will be up on the rostrum again, and we will talk about that in some other context, and I will explain why the Europeans are so much more multilaterally minded than the United States. I will try to give an explanation for that. So, but for today, I think.
Last question, Volkmar.
Yes, please.
Thank you, Herr Schultz. I just wanted to say you referred to our role as becoming the British role, this bumping into other cultures, other nations. I just wanted to know whether you consider it more important that U.S. culture bumps in, is that affecting it more, or is it U.S. government actions? Which would you say is more important in this hostility-building bumping thing?
This bumping occurs on many different levels. I think it's a very good question, and you should probably give that some more thought in your studies. It occurs on many different levels. It is economic, it is social, it is cultural, it is political, it is military, it is a number of things. You see, there are. I may be wrong. I'm not an expert on Muslim societies, but my impression from the point of view of a Western European is that many people in the Muslim world, I don't know, justified or not, sometimes I think not justified, they bear with themselves feelings of inferiority. They feel inferior to the West, although culturally I think they have so much going for them. But we don't notice it. The Western civilization is taking over gradually all other local civil forms of civilization. And all other nations or cultures have their own civilization. And they see it happen that the Western, not just the American, but the Americans are I could also say the Europeans, but the Americans are the linchpin of that civilization. That's why they take the criticism that this Western civilization is taking over. That globalization is not just a trade scheme, not just a military scheme, but it's becoming more and more a cultural thing. Now we have these funny things that on the Champs-Élysées in Paris there's a large Burger King, and it's always crowded. It's always crowded. But the French, I just think, when you talk to the French, look, why, if you don't like the Americans so well culturally, I'm speaking just purely in matters of culture, then why do you go to Burger Kings or so? They say, oh, well, we don't know. They feel uneasy about it. I know that when I say that America is a much disliked country on the world and the earth, I know exactly that in Muslim societies there are millions of young people who would like to live like the Americans. They are young people. I don't know if anyone has paid attention to the fact that the Muslim societies that we are wrestling with right now are very, very young populations. More than half of their people is under the age of 18, I believe, or something like this. Now, this creates unrest. This creates dissatisfaction with one's own fortune. And you look at others and you see, well, why do they have so much? Why do they do it that way? Why do they do this? You want a perspective for your own life. Time's running out. You get older and you feel time's running out. So I think these are very complex how should I say, thinkings that are going on in the minds of peoples, and then collective feelings that arise. And then, of course, it is also something that is taken advantage of. Poor people are easily taken advantage of by rebel-rousers, by fanatics, by so-and-so. The poorer people get, who am I to talk about that? Germany in 1925, 26, 27, 28. It was easy. Surprisingly easy, terribly easy, too easy for the Germans to follow a devil. But they did. And I think we should be understanding of other cultures and nations that go through similar processes. So it's many things really that come together. Thank you very much.